He asked her to sign the papers on a Tuesday, not a Friday, not a Sunday, not some day that already felt heavy with meaning. A Tuesday in the middle of an ordinary week, like it was just another item on his calendar. Tessa Wren Holloway looked at the stack of documents on the kitchen island and understood, in that moment, that she had already been erased from his life long before this morning. "You've been expecting this," Nathaniel said. He wasn't looking at her. He was pouring coffee, like they were discussing the weather, like her entire marriage wasn't sitting in that stack of papers between them. She had, in fact, been expecting it. That was the worst part. The knowing and still being gutted by it. She signed. Her hand didn't shake. She was proud of that later, when she was sitting in her car in the underground parking garage of their Yaletown building, her forehead pressed against the steering wheel, letting herself fall apart where no one could see. The pen had moved across each page with a steadiness she didn't feel in any other part of her body. Tessa was 37 years old. She had spent 9 of those years building something with Nathaniel Cole, building it alongside his ambitions, fitting her own life into the shape his required. She had left a practice in Ottawa to follow him to Vancouver when his company was expanding west. She had rearranged her career, her routines, her sense of home. She had believed that was what love looked like. Accommodation, patience, investment. She had not known about Simone until 8 months before the Tuesday with the papers. She had not known that Nathaniel had been seeing her for almost 2 years, that Simone was 29 and worked in his marketing department, that she had started wearing a bracelet that Tessa recognized because she had once pointed to something almost identical in a shop window, and Nathaniel had said it wasn't really her style. What she had known, even before she knew any of this, was that something had been wrong. The particular silence that settles into a marriage when one person has already left, even though they're still standing in the same kitchen. She signed the papers, and she drove to her sister's place in East Vancouver, and she sat on the couch and did not cry in front of anyone until 11 o'clock at night, when Dana had finally stopped talking about what a piece of work Nathaniel Cole was and gone to bed. And Tessa was alone with the television on low and a glass of wine she wasn't drinking. Then she cried. She cried for a long time. What nobody tells you about the end of a marriage is how quiet it gets afterward. Not peaceful quiet. Suspended quiet, like the moment between a glass slipping off a counter and hitting the floor. Tessa stayed with her sister for 3 weeks before taking a furnished rental in Kitsilano, a 1-bedroom with windows that faced a concrete wall and a landlord who had left a fruit basket that still smelled like artificial strawberry. She unpacked 2 suitcases and told herself this was temporary. Everything was temporary. That was either terrifying or useful, depending on the hour. She went back to work. Her practice, family law, which people found ironic now, in a way they seemed to think was funny, had continued in her absence, carried by her associate and her assistant, and the kind of professional momentum that doesn't particularly require you to be emotionally present. She sat across from clients in conflict, listened to the architecture of their grievances, and gave counsel with a clarity she no longer applied to her own life. It was her body that told her something was different. About 6 weeks after the signing, she sat in the bathroom of her Kitsilano rental at 7 in the morning, looking at a result she had convinced herself she wasn't going to get, and the first thing she felt was not joy, or panic, or even surprise. It was something closer to recognition, a story making a turn she hadn't expected, but somehow couldn't call unforeseeable. She was pregnant. She had been trying for the last 2 years of her marriage. Quiet, careful trying that Nathaniel participated in with a sense of obligation she had chosen, at the time, to interpret as realism. He had told her he was going for a fertility check. He had told her the results were inconclusive, that they should keep trying, give it more time. She had believed him because she had wanted to. She found out later, through a specialist she saw after the positive test, that the particular medication Nathaniel had been on, a detail he had somehow never thought to mention, made conception nearly impossible. He had been taking it for the entirety of the time they were trying. The timeline was precise and deliberate. She did not let herself think too hard about what that meant, because she knew that if she pulled that thread, it would unravel something in her she wasn't ready to face. She told no one for 3 weeks. She went to her appointments alone. She ate better, slept more, stopped the glass of wine at night. She sat with this information the way you sit with something so large you can only understand it from the outside. Then she called Dana. Dana, who had 3 children of her own and who had never trusted Nathaniel with the kind of quiet conviction that had always made Tessa slightly defensive at family dinners, came over that evening with soup and a look on her face that was not quite "I told you so," but was adjacent to it. "He doesn't know," Tessa said. "He doesn't need to know," Dana said. It was the simplest, most clarifying thing anyone had said to her in months. She told him. She knew, even as she was doing it, that it was the right choice. Not because she wanted anything from him. Not because she had changed her mind about the marriage or the papers or the Tuesday in the kitchen. But because she was a family lawyer. She understood better than almost anyone what documentation and disclosure and legal record looked like, and she understood that the choice not to tell him was one she would need to be able to defend. Someday in the clearest possible terms. She called him, not texted. She said it plainly. She was pregnant, the baby was his, she was not asking for anything. The silence on his end lasted long enough that she thought the call had dropped. Then, how far along? 10 weeks, another silence. Then I need to think. She had expected that. What she hadn't expected was the way it made her feel. Not hurt, not disappointed. Mostly just clear. Clear in a way she hadn't been in years, like some instrument she'd been trying to tune had finally found its register. "You have time," she said. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours." She hung up before he could answer. The twins were discovered at her 14-week ultrasound. The technician moved the wand and looked at the screen with a particular professional stillness that Tessa, in her legal training, had learned to interpret as a person choosing their words carefully. Then she turned the monitor slightly and said, "There are two twin girls, as it turned out." Tessa lay on that table for a moment, after the technician stepped out to get the OB, looking at the ceiling of the imaging room, and started laughing. Not the good kind, not the bad kind. The kind that happens when your nervous system doesn't know what else to do. Twin girls. She called Dana from the parking lot. Dana screamed. Actual screaming, the kind Tessa had to hold the phone away from her ear to manage. "Twins," Dana kept saying. "Tessa. Twins. I know. You're going to need a bigger apartment. I know. I'm coming over tonight. I know." She drove home with both hands on the wheel, and the news sitting in her chest like something warm and terrifying and entirely, irrevocably hers. Nathaniel's response when he heard it was twins was to contact his lawyer. His lawyer contacted hers. The language was careful, as it tends to be when lawyers are communicating on behalf of people who have not yet decided what they want. He was not opposed to involvement, the letter said. He was, however, concerned about timing and arrangement. He would need the results of paternity testing prior to any formal agreement. Tessa read the letter twice and set it down on her desk without reacting. Her associate, a young woman named Priya, who was perceptive in the way that people become when they work in proximity to human conflict, watched her from the doorway and didn't say anything. "Draft a response," Tessa said. "Standard. We'll comply with testing. In the meantime, I'll be proceeding independently." She was proceeding independently. She had moved to a larger unit by 16 weeks, a 2-bedroom in the same building in Kitsilano, this one with windows that faced an actual view. She had bought a second-hand glider and assembled it herself, badly, until Dana's husband Marcus came over and fixed the 3 bolts she'd gotten wrong. She was eating well, sleeping in increments, keeping her schedule to 4 days a week. She was managing. She was also, periodically, sitting in the glider in the half-finished second bedroom, looking at the wall where the crib would go, feeling the specific weight of doing something enormous alone. She was not looking for anyone. That needs to be said plainly. She was not, in that phase of her life, in any emotional condition to be looking for anyone, and she was self-aware enough to know it. Which is the only reason she can explain why she wasn't more careful about the afternoon in Jericho Park. It was a Saturday in February, which in Vancouver means low gray sky and wet grass, and the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself, just settles into your coat while you're not paying attention. She walked there because she needed to move, and the seawall was too crowded on weekends, and the park was quiet in the way she had come to need. She sat on a bench near the water with a coffee that was already going cold and watched the inlet. A man sat down at the other end of the bench. She noticed him in the peripheral way you notice strangers in public. Height, coat, the fact that he was also looking at the water. She did not look at him directly. She was not in the business at that point of looking at people directly. He said, "The gray here is different than anywhere else." She looked over. He was perhaps 45, with the kind of face that had settled into itself without apology, not conventionally handsome, but interesting in the way that mattered more. He was looking at the inlet, not at her. "What do you mean?" she said, which was not quite a question. "The gray. Here it's almost silver, not flat. I've been trying to figure it out since I got here. Where are you from?" "Calgary, originally. I spend most of my time in Toronto now." He paused. "Business." She said nothing. He seemed unbothered by that. They sat in silence for a while, which was, she thought, the most functional social interaction she had managed in several weeks. He introduced himself eventually. "Dorian Ashfield." He said it the way people say names, when they've learned not to assume the name will land with any particular weight. Later she would discover it landed with considerable weight in certain rooms. That Ashfield Capital was a name spoken with that specific careful diction that attaches to serious money. But in Jericho Park on a February Saturday, she was just cold and 22 weeks pregnant, and he was just a man who found the great interesting. She told him her name. She did not tell him she was pregnant. The coat covered it still, barely. He left first. "A meeting," he said, "on a Saturday, which she noted but did not comment on." He stood, turned up his collar against the wind, and said, "I hope the rest of your weekend is warmer than this." She said, "Same." He walked away, and she sat for a while longer with her cold coffee, and the water was silver, and she thought, that was an unusual person. She did not expect to encounter Dorian Ashfield again. She encountered Dorian Ashfield again. 3 weeks later, at a fundraising dinner she had almost cancelled. Her firm was a sponsor, her attendance was professionally obligatory, and she had compromised by arriving late and planning to leave early. She was 25 weeks along by then, the coat no longer doing the work it had in February. She had accepted this visibility with the pragmatic resignation she was applying to most things. He was standing near the bar at the far end of the room when she walked in, and he looked at her the way people look when they recognize someone but aren't certain they should say so. She made the decision for him. She crossed the room and said, "The gray was silver again this morning." His expression shifted into something that wasn't quite a smile but was in that direction. "Vancouver is thorough," he said. They stood and talked for 40 minutes. She didn't notice how long it had been until she looked at her phone and saw the time. He asked her what she was drinking, sparkling water, and didn't ask why, which she appreciated. He asked about her practice, listened to the answer with genuine attention. She asked about Ashfield Capital, and he explained it briefly, without the performance that wealthy men sometimes attach to explaining their wealth. At some point he looked at her and said quietly, "I should tell you I noticed. At the park. I didn't say anything because it wasn't any of my business." She understood what he meant. "It still isn't," she said. "No," he agreed. "I know." A pause. "Is someone taking care of you?" The question landed strangely, not intrusively, just with a directness she hadn't encountered in a long time. "My sister," she said. "Mostly good. That was all." They talked about other things. At the end of the evening he asked if he could have her number, and she stood there for a moment with the noise of the room around her and thought about all the reasons this was an objectively poor idea. She thought about them carefully and they were all valid. She gave him her number. He called as opposed to texted, which she noted. He called at reasonable hours. He did not push. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He was in Vancouver often enough that they had dinner twice, lunch once, a long walk along the seawall, where he matched her pace without making a thing of it. He knew she was coming out of a marriage. She told him that early, cleanly, without dramatizing it. He told her he had been through one too, 6 years ago, that it had rearranged certain things in him. He said it matter-of-factly without performing it. She did not tell him about Nathaniel's medication, or about the fertility timeline, or about the letter from Nathaniel's lawyer. Some things were not ready to be spoken aloud yet, and he seemed to understand that there were edges she wasn't ready to let him near, and he did not press them. He was there, by which she means available in a consistent and undemanding way that she had not realized she was missing until she had it. He called when he said he would. He was where he said he would be. Small calibrations. But she was a woman who had spent years adjusting her expectations downward, and so small calibrations felt enormous. She was 31 weeks along when Nathaniel made his first approach. She found out through Priya, who had seen something online, a piece in a business publication, the kind that covers the intersection of finance and personal narrative. Nathaniel had given an interview. He was, the article suggested, poised for a significant expansion of his company's Vancouver operations. He had been asked at the end about his personal life. He had answered with the particular warmth of someone performing warmth for an audience. He mentioned carefully that he was expecting children and looking forward to being involved in their lives. Tessa read the article at her desk at 8:30 in the morning and felt the cold, specific clarity of someone who has just been told how the game is being played. She called her own lawyer before lunch. Over the following weeks, through the careful, deliberate language of legal correspondence, a picture assembled itself. Nathaniel, having done some financial and public profile calculus, had decided that fatherhood served his interests. His company, it emerged, had a partnership clause in a major institutional agreement that included provisions about principal leadership stability and family standing. Language that was old-fashioned and almost certainly unenforceable, but language that Nathaniel apparently believed was worth managing. He wanted access. He wanted it documented, formalized, visible. What he had not factored in, or had chosen not to fully examine, was the document his own lawyer had included in the original divorce filing. A supplementary clause. Inserted by someone, Tessa's lawyer could not yet confirm by whom, though the theory was forming, that transferred certain decision-making rights regarding any future dependents in the event of dissolution. The clause was irregular. It was, depending on interpretation, significant, and Nathaniel had signed it. He had signed it at the same table, on the same Tuesday, on the same stack of papers, where Tessa had signed with a steady hand. Her lawyer delivered this information over the measured professional calm. "Tessa, listen," she said. "Who put it there? We're still working on that. His former assistant, possibly. Someone with access to the filing documents. The review is ongoing. Was it intended to harm him or protect me?" A pause. Hard to say. Possibly both. Possibly neither. Possibly it was placed by someone acting independently for reasons that had nothing to do with either of you. She sat with that. "Whatever the origin," she said finally, "the document exists." "It does," her lawyer said. "And it's valid. The girls were born in April. Not dramatically. Not the way these things happen, in stories where the circumstance underlines the symbolism. A Wednesday morning, overcast, the kind of spring day in Vancouver that can't decide if it's trying. Tessa had Dana on one side, and Dorian, who had driven through the night from Toronto because he had been in meetings and his flight was cancelled, in the waiting area. She had not asked him to come. He came anyway. The girls were small and healthy and arrived within 11 minutes of each other, which the nursing staff seemed to find impressively efficient. Tessa held them both and felt something restructure itself inside her. Not break, not heal, something more complex than either. A rearrangement. The beginning of a different kind of accounting. She named them Rosamund and June. Nathaniel arrived at the hospital the following day. He had not called ahead. He came with the confidence of someone who had pre-calculated his reception and found it acceptable. He arrived at the nursing station and used the word father in a way that was clearly intended to open doors, and it didn't work entirely. Because the charge nurse that morning was a woman who had worked maternity for 19 years and had developed excellent instincts for men who arrived at hospitals without prior arrangement. He waited. Tessa, when she was told, said, "What room is he in?" "He's in the family waiting area on 4. "Tell him I'll be down in 20 minutes. She was down in 45. She had changed, combed her hair, eaten a few bites of the breakfast tray she hadn't touched. She walked into the waiting room with the particular posture of a woman who had, for 9 months, been preparing to have this conversation. Nathaniel looked, she thought, like a man who had been told things were going according to plan and was now not certain they were. "Tessa," he said. She sat down across from him. She didn't say his name back. "My lawyer will be available Thursday," she said. "I'd suggest you have yours ready. I just want to see them. That conversation happens Thursday." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I'm their father. That's a legal designation, not a claim," she said. "On Thursday, My lawyer will walk yours through the relevant documents. All of them. He had not expected that sentence. She could see it in the way the confidence shifted, a fraction. What documents? The filing documents. From our divorce, your lawyer will need to review them carefully, particularly the supplementary clauses. A silence. I don't know what you think you're doing, he said, quieter now. I know, she said. That's Thursday's purpose. She stood. She looked at him for a moment, this man she had spent 9 years beside. This man who had rebuilt his story around her without her knowledge, who had made the bed and declined to lie in it. She felt something, but it wasn't what she had expected. It wasn't rage or grief or the satisfaction she had imagined. It was mostly just the calm of the irreversible. Get some sleep, she said. You look tired. She walked back to the elevator and pressed the button for 4. The Thursday meeting went as her lawyer expected. The clause held. Nathaniel's legal team spent 3 days attempting to identify the origin of the supplementary language and came back with inconclusive results. They could prove it hadn't been Tessa's lawyer. They could speculate about Nathaniel's former assistant, a detail that opened its own uncomfortable questions about what that person may have known and why. But speculation didn't change the document. The document was signed. The document was real. His access request was substantially reduced. Formal process, supervised arrangement, no spontaneous contact. His company's institutional partnership was, as it turned out, reviewed. The clause about principal stability had not, when examined carefully by the institution's legal team, any enforcement mechanism. It was language without teeth. The review concluded without incident, which meant Nathaniel had exposed himself and restructured certain decisions around a risk that dissolved on examination. There was a certain justice in that, Tessa thought. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that arrives without an audience. His CFO resigned the following month, then his head of operations. Then a major contract that had been in late negotiation quietly went to a competitor. She didn't track these things deliberately. They surfaced in her peripheral awareness, the way information does when you are professionally adjacent to certain industries. She noted them without satisfaction, which she would not have predicted of herself once. But she was, it turned out, more interested in her own life than in the deterioration of his. Dorian came to Vancouver on a Thursday in June, when the girls were 8 weeks old. He had been in contact throughout. Calls, the occasional visit. A consistent and undemanding presence she had stopped feeling surprised by and started feeling grateful for, which was its own form of progress. He brought coffee from the place on 4th Avenue that she had mentioned in passing 2 months earlier, which meant he had been paying attention in the way that some people pay attention to detail when it matters to them. He sat in her living room and held June, who was asleep, while Tessa sat across from him in the good chair by the window, and Rosamund was in her lap, and the afternoon light was doing something generous with the room. You look better, he said. I'm sleeping 3 hours at a time. My hair is different. My entire nervous system has been reorganized. But yes, better, he said again. She looked at him. Dorian Ashfield, who had sat at the other end of a bench and found the light interesting, who had called at reasonable hours and not pushed, who had driven through the night and sat in a waiting room and not made it about himself. This person. I don't know what this is, she said. She meant what they were becoming. I know, he said. I'm not in a hurry. I have twin 8-week-olds. I noticed. My life is genuinely chaotic right now, Tessa. He said her name the way she had learned he said things he meant. I know what I'm looking at. She held Rosamund and looked at him, and thought about the Tuesday in the kitchen, the parking garage, the Kitsilano rental with the fruit basket. She thought about the ultrasound technician and the silver light on Jericho Inlet and the particular steadiness she'd found, gradually in herself. She thought about how much she had lost and how differently she understood loss now. Not as subtraction, but as the necessary clearing of space. Okay, she said. It was not a declaration. It was a beginning, small and real, which was exactly what she could manage and exactly what it needed to be. June made a sound in his arms without waking, the way very small babies do, asserting presence in sleep. Rosamund opened one eye and closed it again. Outside, Vancouver was doing what Vancouver does in June. Gray at the edges, gold in the middle. And Tessa sat with everything she had made of the last year and found that it held.